friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
Hello out there and welcome back, Rewind friends. Joining me today is your favorite co-lead pastor and mine, Captain Kirk Giles.
Does this have anything to do with the fact we just reviewed your performance review for next year?
It does, and we also talked about the time when I broke the tooth out of one of your offspring.
Yes.
So
all right.
I do have to, butter you up a little bit before we get into this conversation. But this Sunday, we hit a milestone. The past 753 weeks, we've been working through the Sermon on the Mount, and Sermon on the Mount is Matthew 5, 6, and we just crossed the threshold into chapter 7.
It's like entering the promised land. We've crossed the Jordan.
Exactly like that.
We're getting, yeah.
A completely on point comparison. That's where we are. So we crossed the threshold into Matthew 7, and we have this conversation that's probably a little outdated for our time, talking about judging people.
Yeah.
So
that never happens now.
I know. So
we're past that.
My first question is, how do you prepare for such an irrelevant topic? That's No. First real question, though, is happy Father's Day. It was Father's Day on Sunday. So what did you do to celebrate?
Well, first thing I did was I came home and had a nap. I was exhausted after church on Sunday, sitting out in the sun and sweating up a storm.
I was hiding under an umbrella. You were mercilessly in the middle of it all.
It was a little warm. So, came home, had a nap, and then, then all the kids showed up late in the afternoon. We had a nice dinner together, and it was great.
Yeah. I saw on the internet the cake that Sydney made for you, which is... She's outrageously good at that stuff.
Andrew is so good. I'm still eating some of it. I had some today for lunch, and it is...
cake for lunch. That's the lunch of champions.
Well, it wasn't the only thing I had. I had something else healthy with it, just to offset.
Right.
You got to have counterbalance in
That's
life.
right. Life is all about everything in moderation.
Yeah, it was a cookies and cream cake, homemade cookies and cream cake. And,
That sounds like a good...
My daughter loves me. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. We're going to move on from here. All right. So we roll into this conversation about judgment and judgmentalism and all that sort of stuff. And you actually even say this a little bit later in your sermon that it's easy for that to become a back and forth, right? That if you feel judged, then you respond in judgment. So when you started speaking, my first question to you is, how do you have that conversation? How do you preach not to judge in a way that doesn't feel judgmental?
Well, I'll say that this week, God actually did a really good job of sharpening me to make sure I didn't, because the whole week long, as I'm preparing this message, it was like one of those weeks where every day something happened where I'm thinking to myself, oh, right, I'm not supposed to judge. Oh, don't judge. So it was all week long, I had these opportunities kind of thrown in my face. So I came in fully aware of my own temptation to easily fall into judging other people. And so I was grateful to the Lord for that, as annoying as it was while it was happening.
Iron sharpens iron. It's more of nails on a chalkboard, actually.
Pretty much.
Was there anything this is a fairly familiar passage. You've done a lot of preaching throughout your life and familiar with Scripture. Was there anything as you went through it that felt like a light bulb or an aha moment for you?
I think probably the most significant aha moment came when I was thinking through the illustration of actually having the log in your eye, and trying to just come to grips with the reality of all the things that can go wrong when you actually have a log in your eye. And how it's easy to read a passage like this and just kind of gloss over those kinds of things. But to understand, Jesus was a very visual teacher.
Yeah.
He used his surroundings a lot to help people understand his point. And so to try to use the visual of a log and an eye and go, what can possibly go wrong? You know, you can fall, you can hurt yourself with it. You can run over people because you don't see them. You can, you know, go slamming into the person you're actually trying to help because you got this log in your eye. And there's just so many different things. And for me, that was kind of an aha moment to understand the practical implications of what Jesus was going after here.
And shout out to Seth Burt, who demonstrated that live and in person.
Seth was a champ. And shout out to Jeff Lowry, who let me call him a sinner publicly on Sunday morning.
We're all in that boat, Jeff. I didn't think you were going to there's this moment where I was like, I don't think he's going to let Seth know that he can be done here.
Like, just let him stand
how
there for the whole
long will
time.
he stand there before he takes those logs from in front of his face?
Seth's in our life group.
Okay.
And so, we have this kind of merciless back and forth between the two of us. So it was kind of fun to just let him stand there for a while.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
For me, I wasn't feeling awkward for him. I was laughing to myself. That's awesome. So we get into this conversation about judgment and all that it can produce, but Jesus has some very complex, intertwined things that he wants to say to us. Could you summarize, in maybe just a few short words, what Jesus is trying to tell us to do here? Stop it.
Just stop. Like he gets, I mean, that's what I love about it. Jesus, there are so many times where he's just such a bottom line, kind of just get to the point. And that's kind of where he starts. He starts with the point, which was just like, stop, just don't judge. Don't do it. And, you know, again, we gloss over that so easily because we're so familiar with the passage. And we think it's everybody else's problem. Everybody else is judging. And like to actually pause and think that Jesus actually starts his entire teaching. He doesn't build up to kind of this grand finale of because this and this and this, therefore thou shalt.
Don't do this anymore.
Right. He just starts with just don't do it.
I feel like Jesus is way more holy than I am, for sure. Like
you feel like that?
But I feel like I just hear when you were saying that, I was like, I've had those moments in like parenting especially where you're just like, stop.
That's
like, why are you still doing? I've told you so many times, this produces nothing helpful. Just don't.
That's exactly what it's like. It is just like a parent talking to a kid and saying, you just need to stop. And I appreciate that about Jesus. I appreciate that he doesn't mix words and he just dives right into it.
Yeah. So, but then there's this like toilet bowl effect on judgment that I thought I have walked this road way too often and maybe have been unwilling to admit it until you just like held up a mirror for me on Sunday where you're like, you know, it's not just about that one thing. It's not like, oh, you're frustrated with your church and it stays there. You get frustrated with your church, then you bring it to work and then you bring it home and then you kick the dog. And it just is like downward spiral of like, actually everyone around me is dumb. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true that we get into this reality where we become negative about something. And that begins to then transition into becoming negative about everything.
Yeah.
We start to find fault in everything and everyone and every circumstance. And I've done it myself. I've experienced it many times. But I think it's a living illustration of how becoming a judgmental person, it literally begins to rot away at your heart and your mind, that you become completely clouded to the realities of what's going on around you. So my mic's starting to drop a little bit here, so we're going to hear a funky noise while I try to adjust my mic.
All right. For those of you not watching on YouTube, it's just noise. You don't even get to see Kirk struggle.
That's right.
And so there's this judgmental and critical spirit. And I think people outside of the church, this is probably the most quoted passage of people who don't read the Bible, right? Like,
it's even the most quoted passage of people who do read the Bible sometimes.
And you're probably right on that. So I can't help but wonder, like there are standards of righteousness that we are called to as followers of Jesus. So how do we do that work that we're called to live to that standard and to call others to that standard? So how do we do that in a way that doesn't come across like judgment? Or is the way that it's received our responsibility?
I don't think that you can carry the full weight of the responsibility of how something is received.
Okay.
Honestly, and this is going to sound judgy, but
see, it's a delicate balance, Kirk.
There are some people that if you sneeze, they're offended because you sneezed.
Yeah.
It just doesn't take much. Right. To set them off. And you can't control that response. And nowhere in this passage does Jesus actually tell us that we can control the response of the other person.
True, yeah.
In this passage, he is simply holding us accountable for our own attitudes, our own hearts, our own actions. And that's a pretty consistent theme throughout Scripture. We are ultimately accountable for ourselves and what we do and how we do it and why we do it. But when it comes to other people, here's what often happens, I find. As Christians, we enter into the space of being concerned with how is the other person going to respond to this.
Yeah,
and
I've done that. Yeah.
Right. And so here's what my experience has been. When we start to live in that space of how is the other person going to respond, many times we actually don't even do anything. Right. So we don't, so we know we need to talk to a friend or a relative or a spouse about whatever issue. But in our minds, we start playing a game going, well, I don't want to come across as judgy.
I've said that very sentence to myself multiple times.
Right. So, and if I say something, they're going to think that I'm being judgmental. And so I'm just better off not saying anything.
Yeah.
And I've seen more Christians, like it used to be that the predominant response for Christians was, I'm just going to kind of run all over you.
Right. Steamroll you.
Yeah. Now we've gone almost to the other extreme, which is, I'm just going to mind my own business. And that's not the message Jesus is giving to us in this passage. He's not calling us to mind our own business. And so I think that as Christians, we have to look at it through the lens of, am I being faithful to my responsibility before God? And there's some markers that you can look at. Like, do you have a sense of gentleness when you're coming at the conversation? Do you have a sense of humility, recognizing your own sinfulness? Do you have a sense of an actual genuine love for the person? Or are you after the issue?
Oof, that's a great question. I like that. Now, again, I sort of said tongue-in-cheek earlier that, maybe we're bypassed this in our culture, but I think we both know that this is a real issue today. Do you have any sense of maybe common threads or common reasons why we have this bent towards being judgmental? Why is that such a natural reaction for us to judge other people?
Because I think at the core of it, we're just self-centered people who think we're always right and everybody else is always wrong.
I wouldn't hold an opinion unless I thought it was right, Kirk.
Right, exactly. Like as soon as you start to say, what's wrong with that person? Why don't they see things the way I see it? Immediately what you've done is you've elevated yourself as being more righteous than they are. And so at the core of being judgmental is the idea that, I'm holy and you're not. and so there is that sense of self-righteousness. There is that sense of ego, pride, whatever word you want to throw around it. That's where we live in, and that's why.
Yeah, and I think this has been a complaint levied against the church and Christians for a very long time, and I think there have been times where we have earned that fairly.
Absolutely.
And that has been our posture far too much. And we were actually talking a little bit before the cameras went live here that, there's a little bit of a resurgence of that fundamentalist attitude inside of the church. There's almost like against the people who are offended every time you sneeze. They almost want to offend.
Yeah, that's right. There's a growing sense of a fundamentalist kind of attitude. And I'll use the word attitude because fundamentalism can be used in different ways. For some people, it refers to just believing the fundamentals of the faith, but they're quite often, if you look through history of fundamentalism, certainly over the last 50, 60 years, it often comes with a bit of an edge to it from an attitude perspective.
There's a very much an embodied holier than thou.
Yeah, there can be a tone. And, and I want to be cautious here too, that I don't become guilty of sounding holier than thou when saying that is the case in some fundamentalist circles. But, I think we have to always keep coming back to things like the fruit of the Spirit. Like, do you want to know if you are actually responding in a Spirit-filled, God-honoring way? Well, gentleness and patience are parts of the fruit of the Spirit, and reveal whether or not we are living a Spirit-filled, Spirit-led life in all of our interactions with each other. So if your tone is harsh, then you have to ask yourself, where does that come from? And is that Spirit-filled? Now, here's where somebody might push back. Well, Jesus called Pharisees a brood of vipers. That does not sound like a gentle tone.
No, that's definitely out there. Yeah.
Right. So that's where somebody might push back. And you have to figure out how do you wrestle with that reality that Jesus actually called some people brood of vipers. And for me, the best way that I can wrestle with it is, first of all, Jesus was sinless. So Jesus never had to worry about having the beam in his own eye.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Whereas he warns all the rest of us that your starting point needs to be consider the beam that's in your own eye and deal with that.
Yeah. I actually got a very firsthand experience of this very reality. Yesterday evening, Laura was looking up and throwing something into one of our lofts, and a fleck of wood landed in her eye, and it was very large. And having 3 or 4 kids circling us, being like, "What's wrong with mom?" And because she's trying to flush it out of her eye, and having to pay the slow, careful attention, being like, "Everybody get out!
Yeah,
I need to focus on this," and just to understand that if it didn't have my full and undivided attention, I was actually going to do damage to Laura's eye, right?
That's
because I'm trying to take the giant fleck of wood out and scratching her cornea. Some friends who are optometrists who would be like, "I'm not sure you still did it right," but how much care and attentiveness and focus and love for the other person that was necessary in order to make that happen, right?
Yeah.
And for me, just sort of even preparing for this, it was such a cool reminder of this reality that if we don't come with a care, a focus, a gentleness, and a love for the other person, man, you're going to do damage.
You are, absolutely. And that's, I think, ultimately what Jesus was getting at in this passage is that we have to have that kind of care, that kind of attentiveness to the person, and a genuine love for meeting their needs. And the other piece to that is that's a very personal touch to do that, right? As opposed to I'm going to slam everybody on social media and just kind of lump everybody together into one category, and I'm just going to walk all over them on social media, which is the norm today.
Yeah. So there's definitely a reality in which inside of the church we have struggled with this attitude and posture far more than we are called to, right? That falls outside of what Jesus is commanding us to do here. But we live in a culture where, cancel culture is a thing, and people are like, I feel offended by this. You're not allowed to speak anymore, and all those sorts of things. So as followers of Jesus who need to speak the truth in love, bring the hope and the vision of the kingdom into a broken world that doesn't yet hold to, what Jesus is talking about for these last 2.5 chapters here, how do we posture ourselves in such a way that we would even have a hearing? If you think both Jesus' commands and the culture in which we find ourselves, how do we do that well?
I think we have to take we have to learn something from people like the Apostle Paul, who Paul says to Timothy, I am the worst of sinners. And he goes on and basically describes his own story, his own testimony of, hey, like this is who I am. These are the sins that I've committed. Like I murdered people.
Yeah.
And I am who I am today only because of the grace of God. And I think that posture of humility and weakness in our own lives that say, like, I'm not just bringing the gospel to you to correct you. I'm actually bringing the gospel to you because I know I need the gospel in my own life. And I know how Jesus has changed my life. And so I want you to have the same kind of opportunity to experience the same kind of love and grace for you.
Yeah. That sounds an awful lot like taking the log out of your eye.
Yeah, it does. Go figure. But yeah, I again, you know, it is so, I don't know about anybody else listening, but it is so easy to look at the people in the world who are outside of the church, who are living certain ways, making certain decisions, and just becoming furious and frustrated with the decisions that they're making in their life. It's so easy to do that. But to remember that, like, every one of those people have a story around that.
Yeah.
Every one of those people don't actually know that they're sinners.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, you know, they are living what is a normal way of life in their mind. They don't understand the influence and the impact of sin in our life. Like, we live in a post-Christian culture, and so many times we assume that everybody who's a sinner knows that they're a sinner.
Right.
But
that's definitely not the case.
It's definitely not the case. You know, so many people have never heard the story of Jesus even anymore.
Yeah.
In our last church at Easter, we had a sign outside of our church, and it was a classic kind of Christianese phrase. We just said, "He's risen," on the sign. It was like, you know, Easter Sunday, and we had this big sign, "He's risen." And we had a group of students who were walking by our church one day who actually stopped at the church, knocked on the door, and said, "Can we ask you a question?" Pastor said, "Sure." And they said, "Who are you talking about? And why did he wake up from his nap?" He's risen, right? And so to them, it was like, well, like, what do you mean? Like, who is risen, and what does that even mean?
Right.
And you know, in those moments, you recognize that, oh, like, people actually don't even know this story.
Mm-hmm.
And we make those assumptions that everybody gets it and knows it, and they don't anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I love some of the reflection questions that you asked us at the end to sort of put before ourselves. Like, when was the last time you asked God, you know, are you looking at this from the right perspective? Like, oof, because, you know, there is that spiral of judgment where you're just like, actually, you're wrong. And then this person over here is also wrong. And you just sort of like go off on a tirade sometimes. But there's this culture, both inside and outside of the church, of criticism and reactivity. And how do we mitigate that as followers, or is that even our job? Let me ask this more concisely. How do we act like Jesus in the middle of calling people to live like Jesus?
That's good. If you can figure that out completely, then you should write a book and sell all kinds of copies and retire early.
No.
I think that the reality is, we live in a space where we need to be honest enough to say that we're actually all still trying to figure out what it looks like to live like Jesus.
Mm-hmm. That's the hypocrite part here, right? Where Jesus is pretty ruthless.
Yeah, that's right. Because when Jesus uses the word hypocrite, it is that sense of you're putting on a show like you've got it all together.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can be honest enough to say that, no, actually, we're still all in a state of learning and growing and being refined and shaped to become more like Jesus, again, that will shape the way that you approach people. If you approach people like you've already got it all together, then it will come across like, I've already got it all together and you better get your act together.
Come, children, learn from me.
Exactly. And there is a sense, Paul again said to Timothy, follow me as I follow Christ. And so there is a sense where people who are more mature need to live in a space of going, hey, look, I've gone through some of the bumps in the road of learning what it looks like to follow Jesus and having my character sharpened and my attitudes reframed, all those things. And there is a sense of needing to invite people to follow you, but it's important that you remember what Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. It's this sense of I'm still learning to be shaped into the image of Jesus. And so kind of join me as we go on this together.
So I have two sort of follow-up questions to that. One is like half statement, half question. First, there's this interplay in what Jesus is saying here is as you judge, you will then receive judgment in the same way that you have doled it out. And I find myself, most of my parenting is just be like, would you like if somebody else did that to you? That's just,
right. Yeah.
Just a common refrain. And I feel like that's what Jesus is trying to get at here. Do you want people to be merciful and compassionate to you when you're goofing up constantly? And so am I right in seeing that there?
Yeah, I think there's definitely that piece of it. I think there's a greater piece of it, and that is the way that God relates to you.
Okay.
Because I think that when Jesus talks earlier in the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." There is that picture of it's God who's giving you mercy. If you're showing mercy to others, God's going to show mercy towards you. And I think that in Matthew 7, what you were just talking about, that we're going to be judged to the same standard. Jesus is just saying, I'm telling you not to judge, and it's really for your own benefit.
Yeah.
Because people are going to judge you a certain way, and God's going to kind of hold you to a certain standard based on the way that you treat other people.
And he does the same thing a chapter earlier at the end of the Lord's Prayer when he's talking about forgiveness, right?
That's right.
These are passages that make me deeply uncomfortable. I just want you to know.
Jesus was an expert in making us uncomfortable.
Now, maybe this question will make things less clear than more clear, but I'm going to ask it anyways. So Jesus here says, who do you seeing the speck in your brother's eye? Notice the log in your own. When he's saying brother, am I to fairly infer that that's us talking to people inside the family, right? This is me approaching another follower of Jesus and saying, hey, there's some stuff that, as your brother, I feel the need to point out, and graciously coming to you, how we've been talking about with a posture that's humble and understanding the grace I've received, and then extending that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that reality in the context of this passage. Jesus is talking about in the family.
So does then our call to go out and call people to holiness extend past the family of God?
Our call to people, when we call people to holiness outside of the family, we're calling people to a standard that they don't understand. They can't understand.
Right.
What we have to call people to outside is, and maybe we're playing with words a little bit, but what we have to call people to who are outside is a call to repentance, to use the biblical word.
Yeah,
that
that's right.
you are going down a path that ultimately leads to your destruction.
Right.
Right. And the call to repentance is to say, I'm warning you, this is not going to end well.
Right.
And turn the other way so that you can actually find life.
Yeah. And again, you can do that with a couple of different tones, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, you can. I was in a city in the United States a few years ago. I won't name the city, but I was in a city in the United States a few years ago, and there was a guy who was out late at night on the street corner, had a megaphone out, and literally just yelled into the microphone, "All of you are on your way to hell. Turn to Jesus right now." And he just kept saying that over and over again. All of you are on your way to hell. Turn to Jesus right now. And I understand, and I appreciate his heart.
There's an urgency there that I don't always see in the church.
That's right. I really do appreciate it. But every fiber of my being wanted to say, you're not actually helping right now.
Yeah.
Because you have all these people who are in a different place and in a different story, and you're not engaging with their stories. I think about like the woman caught in adultery. This to me is one of the classic examples of Jesus at work.
Yeah.
Woman caught in adultery, and Jesus enters into the story to protect her from the religious people that want to stone her and end her life. He protects her from those people. And then as soon as they're all gone, he looks at her and says, "Okay, so now go and stop sinning."
Yeah.
And so there's just this double-edged approach that Jesus has where he's like, I'm going to be very personal for you. I'm going to protect you from the mob that wants to lynch you. But when I'm with you, just you and me, I'm going to have an honest heart-to-heart conversation with you and tell you, this is going to end badly for you. You need to turn and you need to, turn your life around, and to use our word, repent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why I love the ending with communion on this particular Sunday, right? If we're talking about not judging people as a people who have escaped the wrath of God through the blood of Jesus, then that should be what's reshaping our posture here. So I thought it was just such a beautiful way to end that conversation, to say like, hey, friendly reminder.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I've had some people say to me, you and Derek, you're like preaching the gospel like every week. And I said, yeah, we kind of think it's the thing. It's the message to keep bringing in front of us, because without the gospel, where are we?
Yeah. So I think that's the inescapable truth, right? To be, especially through this section, right? Like, this is the kingdom manifesto where we're just constantly being reminded of what it looks like to live a kingdom lifestyle.
Yeah.
And if your entrance to the kingdom was not earned,
that's right.
So let's remember that as we
absolutely
critique other people. So there was a passage that you were assigned that you just 100% skated on, and I need you to confess that publicly.
Yeah, I did. I ignored one verse. And Pastor, so for those of you who don't know how this works in our church, so Pastor Derek, he will create a what we call a series design, and he basically plans out kind of a summary of each week, what we're going to talk about, what passage of scripture we're going to preach from. He doesn't give us an outline. We're not reading Pastor Derek's words.
That's right. He's not the puppet master.
No, he's not doing that. But and
develops that in consultation with a team.
That's
right.
People, there is a team of us who tell him when he's filled with heresy in his. No, he never ever. Yes,
says the guy who just preached on judgment.
That's right. So in Matthew chapter 7, I'm just gonna mention this because some of you who are really excited that we're going verse by verse, you will note that this coming Sunday we're going to skip over a verse because I didn't teach it last Sunday, and it's verse 6, which says, "Do not give dogs what's holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you." And I did skip that verse because it just seemed really weird in the whole context of everything else that Jesus was saying.
I actually remember having a conversation with Derek on the podcast probably a year and a half ago and saying like, oh, and I felt like I had a light bulb moment. I was like, Derek, I feel like I understood this. And he's like, actually, I don't think you've got it.
So now I want to know what Derek said to you, because
I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sure we could pull it from
because I read like 5 people and they all said different things about what that verse means.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can give it my best shot and best guess, but I can only tell you it's my complete best guess.
All right, give us the Captain Kirk summarized edition of the commentary on Matthew 7, verse 6.
So, as with everything in the Bible, you have to look at it in context.
Correct.
Right. So Jesus is coming out of this teaching about judging others, and he gets into verse 6. After talking about taking the speck out of your brother's eye and dealing with the log in your own eye, he gets into verse 6 and talks about giving dogs what's holy, throwing pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. I think what Jesus is recognizing is that there are people in this world who, no matter how gently you try to approach them, no matter how lovingly, carefully you try to come at them with the truth, they are people who simply, they're going to respond to it like dogs or like pigs. Like they are just going to be ruthless with it. They have no desire to ever listen to truth.
Yeah.
They will be vicious in their attacks. They will be vicious in their response. And there is nothing that you can do about that. And I think Jesus is giving us a bit of a warning of this. You're going to come across people like this. And as you do, don't waste your energy and breath trying to figure out, should I try and figure out a different way to approach this person with this same love and this same truth?
Yeah. And see, I feel like if I'm taking the Captain Kirk summarized edition here, I actually think that's beautifully tied in, right? Because that's stuff I wrestle with as somebody who, like, I deeply love sharing the gospel with people who are outside. And I've had those conversations that go off the rail and you're like, I don't know what I said to elicit that sort of reaction. And people taking things, again, we keep often circling back to conversations on social media and being like, you know, I post a picture of a nice flower and someone's like, well, you actually hate all other plants then. And those people who just seem so highly reactive and from my perspective, sometimes feel really unreasonable. And I think to have the words of Jesus to be like, that's going to happen. Is comforting for me anyways.
It's going to happen, and don't waste any more energy on trying to figure out a different way around it because you can't.
Yeah. It's just a reality that exists in our world. But to our call, if you go back the other 5 verses before this, is to be people who don't contribute in any way to that sort of ethos and atmosphere, but instead reflect people who have been graciously invited into a kingdom and did not earn your place at the table, and then treat others in kind, especially in areas of correction. Is that a fair summary?
That's a very fair summary.
All right. Well, I think that's it. I think I've just nailed it. Like, I've just summarized it perfectly, and there's nowhere to go from here.
You could write your own commentary now, Andrew.
That would be a very short, poorly selling book. All right. Well, thank you guys, Rewind friends, for joining us. I just encourage you, this is a real battle for us, to go back and listen to that sermon again if that's helpful for you, to meditate on these scriptures, and to be reminded. Again, it was helpful for us to land in communion as we wrapped up our service on Sunday, and to just constantly be reminded of the grace that we have received. Because if we don't root ourselves in the truth of the gospel, then it's easy to be self-righteous and stand in a place of judgment that we have not earned to be in that. So go as people of grace who have been loved much and forgiven much. Go and speak the truth in love. And we love you. We'll see you next week.